Legislation. Gov. UK. Formerly the UK Statute Law Database is the official web-accessible database of the statute law of the United Kingdom, hosted by the National Archives. It contains all primary legislation in forces of 1991, and all primary and secondary legislation since the date. It does not include legislation which was fully repealed prior to 1991. The contents have been revised to reflect legislative changes up to 2002, with material that has been amended since 2002 noted in a table but not yet fully updated. New Statute Law Database. In December 2008, the Statute Law Database team transferred to the National Archives. This meant that the responsibility for the OPSI and SLD websites became the responsibility of one department. A major consideration of the transfer was to enable the rationalization of the two websites in order to provide one point of access to all UK legislation and in doing so reduce duplication in effort, increase efficiency and provide a more user-friendly and accessible service across the board. Since December 2008, a considerable amount of work has taken place to look at the customers of the joint services are and look carefully at their requirements. The content of the new statute law database consists of the combined content of the previous UK statute law database and the Office of Public Sector Information website. Updated legislation on the new website is the same data as that available on SLD. The only exceptions are a few acts that are currently being updated by the editorial team that are available on SLD but will not be available on the new site until the revisions are complete and they're ready to be published to SLD and the new website. Many of the revised documents held by SLD are also available in the OPSI dataset as an acted version. The new website combines these so you can switch between the different versions. Users of SLD might be particularly interested in the following aspects of the new site. For the majority of revised legislation now held the as enacted and revised version, the different versions can be accessed via the buttons in the What Version area on the table of contents. Next and previous as buttons are now available when navigating the content of legislation. Change to legislation. A lot of work has been done in order to make the revised legislation as usable as possible despite the fact it is not fully up to date. The development of the new site has allowed us to take the tables of legislative effects information currently published on SLD and incorporate the unapplied effects into the content of the legislation at provision level. This means that instead of having to look through the tables of effects year by year in order to establish the current position of a piece of legislation, you can access all the outstanding effects when viewing the act. The outstanding effects also include links to the affecting legislation, meaning that you can view the amendments more easily too. Links in annotations. All annotations giving authority for amendments that have been applied now contain links to the affecting legislation. Probably one of the main areas of difference from SLD is that the attributes information have been removed from the foot of the provisions in order to make it more meaningful to users. The geographical extent can now be turned on and off using the Show Geographical Extent button, and the start date information is now presented on the timeline of changes so as to give the ability to navigate through the legislation at specific points in time. History. Background. Access to statute law in the United Kingdom was, for some time, a difficult matter. As the Hansard Society noted in 1992, to present the accessibility of statute law to users and the wider public is slow, inconvenient, complicated and subject to several impediments. To put it bluntly, it is often very difficult to find out what the text of a law is, let alone what it means. Something must be done. Development. The idea for creating a UK-wide legislation database dates back to 1991 when the government awarded a contract to Syntegra, a BT company previously known as Secure Information Systems Limited, to create a database containing all the public acts comprised in the publication statutes in force together with all amendments made since a base date of the 1st of February 1991. The database was delivered by Syntegra in November 1993, but not accepted by the government until summer 1995 at a cost of £700,000. The database was originally intended for use by the Parliamentary Council Office, but following testing with the Public Service it was decided to make it available to legal practitioners and the private sector on a commercial basis, as well as to public libraries and Citizens Advice Bureau. The original database consisted of an interleaf editorial system which allowed legislation to be held and edited in SGML. In 1991 there were no plans to make the database available on the Internet. The aim of the project was to create an electronic version of statutes in force which would be available on CD-ROM to much the same audience as that to which statutes in force had been available prior to 1991. In 1995, Syntegra developed the first version of the Statute Law Database website. This was only ever available in pilot form and to a limited number of government users. On the 9th of February 1996, Roger Freeman, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, announced that the copyright and charging policy of the Statute Law Database would be decided nearer the time of implementation in 1997. This date was pushed forward to 1999 and then to 2000. In March 1999, it was disclosed that he partially updated databases presently available to a number of users within central government who have access to the Statutory Publications Office intranet. The Lord Chancellor's Department are considering options for the future marketing of the Statute Law Database. These options include free Internet access, the granting of non-exclusive licenses to legal information publishers and the provision of a subscription online service. Quote, in September a demonstration version of the database was made available on the Syntegra track record website, containing legislation for the years 1985 to 1995, though this was quickly removed. In 2004, it was announced that the system designed by Syntegra would be modernized by replacing its editorial database, developing two new inquiry systems and the other for the general public, and the revision and updating of the statute book. Two contracts were signed by the Department for Constitutional Affairs with Computer Center, one for the delivery of the editorial system, the other for the government inquiry system. The combined cost of the contracts was £458,000. A content management system named TSO ActiveText is used in the new system to store legislation in XML with a specific DTD. Documents in ActiveText are fragmented and can be edited using XMetal, which allows editors to check documents in and out of the database for editing. All the legislation from the original SGML database was converted into XML. After the editorial system was completed, further development began on a new online statute law database inquiry system. The government's inquiry system was launched on the 31st of May 2006 with a plan to roll out general access in 3 phases. The first stage would open the database to a very limited number of users for testing. On the 2nd of August 2006, the Department for Constitutional Affairs commenced commenced the second stage of the database project, allowing the system to be tested in use by issuing login details and passwords to a wide range of selected customers including government users, law librarians, police staff, Citizens Advice Bureau and students. The pilot did not specifically include any commercial legal publishers. Initially, the DCA intended to charge users for access to historical law, but not current law. However, following pressure notably from The Guardian and its Free Our Data campaign, it was announced in October that the system would be free to use. The SPO's Claire Allison revealed nevertheless that the DCA would be looking at options that concern the commercial reuse of the data. The delays involved in realizing the database led to a number of groups requesting the raw data of the legislation in order to put together their own versions. Among those refused access was Julian Todd, the co-creator of the website They Work For You, who stated, "I can't comprehend what the DCA thinks it is gaining by not giving us a database dump of the law." Todd had submitted a request under the Freedom of Information Act 2000 for disclosure of the data, but this was refused and he brought an appeal before the Information Commissioner. The database was finally made available to the public on the 20th of December 2006. Announcing its launch, Baroness Ashton, a parliamentary undersecretary in the Department for Constitutional Affairs, said that the Statute Law Database provides an authoritative and easy-to-use historical database of UK statute law. I hope it will be welcomed as a useful tool for professionals who need to keep up with changes to the law as well as those who simply have an interest in historic and current legislation. 2007 Present content. The database contains the text of primary legislation in force at the 1st of February 1991 and secondary legislation issued after that date, some 30,000 texts. All primary legislation on the site has been revised to show the effect of legislation and amendments enacted until 2002. The database is not fully up-to-date and, as of 2009, there is no estimate for when it will be fully up-to-date. Editors are currently applying amendments enacted between 2003 and 2007. Acts are targeted for updating according to a system of priorities based on demand ascertained mainly from Web Trends reports showing which acts are viewed most frequently. Until December 2008, the responsibility for keeping the database up to date lay with the Statutory Publications Office, part of the Ministry of Justice. Since the date, responsibility has been transferred to a team within the Information and Policy Services Directorate of the National Archives. Following the transfer, a program of work is now underway to bring together the content of the existing statute law database with as enacted original legislation from the website of the Office of Public Sector Information to form a single UK legislation website. In addition, a table of effects has been published every year since 2002 which lists all the legislation repealed. The effects of primary and secondary legislation brought into force since 2002 on primary legislation in the database. Primary legislation. The database content includes the following primary legislation in updated form: UK Public General Acts, Acts of the Parliament of Great Britain, Acts of the English Parliament, Acts of the pre-UK Parliaments, UK Local Acts, Acts of the Scottish Parliament, Measures of the Welsh Assembly, Acts of the Irish Parliament, Acts of the Parliament of Northern Ireland, Measures of the Northern Ireland Assembly, Acts of the Northern Ireland Assembly, Orders in Council made under Northern Ireland Acts, Church of England Measures. Other primary legislation that is held in unrevised form includes Post 1991 Local Acts, Secondary legislation. The database also contains certain secondary legislation which is not updated. Statutory instruments. Welsh statutory instruments. Scottish statutory instruments. Statutory Rules of Northern Ireland N.B. For the period 1991 to 2005, only those statutory rules which affect UK legislation are held. Church instruments. Current limitations. While the database reflects amendments to primary legislation, it is not up to date. Also, the database does not currently include pre-1991 repealed legislation. Most pre-1991 local acts and revisions to post-1991 local acts. Secondary legislation predating 1991. The effect of revocations of or amendments to secondary legislation, so that the full text of post-1991 repealed legislation can be found without any indication as to its repeal. Orders in Council made under the royal prerogative. Northern Ireland statutory rules made between 1991 and 2005 which only affect Northern Ireland. BL laws. There are no plans to extend the database to include the above material. However, US Select Committee report on the merits of statutory instruments, published on 7 November 2006, recommended that the database should be extended to cover secondary as well as primary legislation. The government responded that this was indeed important, but that the immediate priority is to ensure that a fully revised and up-to-date version of the official statute book is delivered for use by the public and that work on this is maintained. After this has been achieved, consideration will then be given as to how work can be extended to updating secondary legislation.